Red Dead Redemption 2, we've been given another trailer for the game. And the Wild West really doesn't seem like it's been that much different to what we're being presented with in Red Dead Redemption 2. Of course, there are fictional changes and things like that, but by 1899, several gunman legends have lived and died. Of course, some of them are still around, but they're definitely not as common as they were during the prior 30 years. From men who are able to hold up trains and make a killing, wreak havoc as far as farming businesses were concerned, and just generally steal banks and be a nuisance to society, to the lawmen who actually stood up to these men and faced them, risking their lives to defend the people, uphold justice, that sort of thing. Or just to get paid. Either way, technology changed the game a bit. Certain businesses weren't worth stealing from anymore. Others became a lot harder to exploit or take advantage of. But let's go over some of these gunmen, as they were called, whether they were outlaws or laws.
As long as we get paid or you get shot, I'm happy.
Outlaws, pretty much clues in the title, such as Billy the Kid, was actually pretty young in comparison to a lot of other gunmen that we're going to be talking about. He was in the cattle rustling business. This was more or less the act of stealing cattle. Cows. And it was a fairly profitable business for him. He eventually had to switch things up and start stealing other things, including horses, for instance, but his gang revolved around doing this fairly efficiently, or at least as well as possible. His story's pretty interesting. He had a run-in with Pat Garrett, someone who he actually had a bit of a history with, gets caught by him, has a trial, sentenced to death by hanging for murders, but just before his hanging was supposed to take place, during a trip to the outhouse, he's able to free himself of his handcuffs, procure himself some weapons, find a shotgun, kill another guard, free himself with a pickaxe, and then escape the prison on horseback. Now, over the next 6 months of his life, he's chased, tailed, or tracked down by Pat Garrett, and this time Pat Garrett is a bit fed up with the fact that he had to actually chase the 21-year-old, so he ended up just killing him by shooting him through the chest. Pretty metal way to go, but that was Billy the Kid. Henry Newton Brown also saw some time as a cattle rustler, and he was actually working with or in Billy's gang. Later, though, he sees time as a deputy sheriff, so he sort of switches sides, I suppose you could say. Unfortunately for him, he loses his job after too many drunken fights, but eventually finds work as a ranch worker, and then sees himself as an assistant marshal and then an actual marshal, one of the quickest men on the trigger in the Southwest. And thanks to this fame, he also found himself a wife, a stable house. It looks like he might have even settled down, but he started living a bit too extravagantly and queued up quite a few debts, and this left him in a spot of bother, and he chose one of his only ways out being to try and rob a bank. He pretended to leave the town under the guise that he was going to be hunting down some bandits or outlaws, when in actuality this was just a ruse so that he could meet up with some outlaws and one of the deputies that he appointed. Then he tries to rob a bank, and it was going quite well. He killed a few people, but they managed to seal the vault, the bank vault where all the money was, and the robbery failed. The robbers try to flee, but they're caught by a very angry mob who were sick of this sort of thing, and the men were lynched, or at least Brown was lynched, or shot dead. One of the two. Looking at the other side of the coin, though, as we mentioned before, Pat Garrett was a sheriff that already captured Billy the Kid and killed 2 of Billy's men to do it. So when he found out that Billy somehow escaped prison, he wasn't particularly pleased and took it kind of personally, which is probably part of the reason as to why he ended up taking no chances and shot Billy through the chest to make sure that he'd actually die. The sad part about this for Garrett, though, was that he'd actually see some flack for killing Billy in this way. Then we have Seth Bullock. Before he was a lawman, Bullock was actually a member of the Territorial Senate at age 22. This didn't last too long, though, and after his time in politics, he became a sheriff, sending his family off to safety whilst he cleaned up the town of Deadwood. He appointed several deputies to help him in this task, and eventually the town was cleared up. Apparently, according to his grandson, he could outstare a cobra or rogue elephant. Whether this was just hyperbole or true, apparently he was influential enough to actually quieten down problems before they would start. Probably not every problem, but problems all the same. He meets his end to cancer, though. Cancer's pretty OP. I'm not saying that these cowboys will be appearing in Red Dead Redemption 2. It's got a full cast of its own fictional characters like Arthur Morgan, for instance. It doesn't necessarily need to rely on real-world history, though Easter eggs are Easter eggs. That doesn't mean some of these fine men's actions can't influence some of the missions, the story, and just how things happen in the game. Still, there were some pretty good reasons as to why in Red Dead Redemption 2, this whole cowboy lifestyle is kind of dying down. As the trailer says, the West did develop quite a bit. The telegraph connected people from miles away who, before, it would have taken an extraordinary amount of time to be able to contact someone so far away. Naturally, some people have been fascinated by this technology, and as we see in Red Dead Redemption 1, others weren't exactly thrilled by the change. But of course, some new innovations were undeniably great, like railroads, allowing people to take journeys that before would have taken months, but now can be taken in the time span of a few days, albeit a little uncomfortably. The initial incarnation of these trains wasn't exactly amazing. Stagecoaches were quite uncomfortable and undesirable when you factor in the fact that bandits or outlaws could hijack your train, steal your stuff, and make your day even worse. Not the greatest of things to consider. One of the better stagecoach robbers, or at least one of the more famous ones, was Black Bart. Famous thing about him was the fact that he never actually fired a shot during his career of robbing trains. He wore a flour sack and almost always called for the box, which, after he stole everything he needed from the train, he left on foot. And certain times, being the cocky man that he was, he actually recited a poem whilst leaving or before leaving, which must have just been sucky to hear. Of course, trains improved. The living conditions within the trains were better. They had built-in toilets, stuff that could prepare food, and were just generally more comfortable. The passenger experience before of a person not being able to fall asleep whilst on the train comfortably versus the new passenger experience of actually being able to do that was probably a definite improvement. How does any of this affect the experience when we're actually robbing a train in Red Dead Redemption 2? Well, the passengers will be a lot more comfortable as we steal everything they own. And of course, something you'll definitely care about evolving, guns. The evolution of guns was pretty sucky for Native Americans though. It helped new settlers to secure more land, to perhaps have more opportunities in America. It also ruined things for the natives, who more or less got the shaft. And we're talking new weapons from guns packed with heavy explosive shells to straight up machine guns. So yeah, sad times to be Native Americans. Not saying we'll find anything like crazy laser beams or something, but a lot of the variety of weapons will probably be in part thanks to this. Of course, those of you that have played Red Dead 1 are probably familiar with all the types of different guns that should make it into the game. Not every technology could cover every area of America that was considered the Wild West though. The winters were pretty darn brutal, especially for ranchers. Speaking of brutal winters, 1886's to 1887's winters, to be specific, was especially cold. Now, considering that the summer of that year was hotter than usual, I suppose it was just finishing off a rotten year of poor weather luck. The heat dried up water sources and invited tiny winged pests to play with. I'm sure you're familiar with them. The cold was bad news for the animals that perished, but the farmers were among the casualties as well. The snow was so bad that some people even died in the snow itself, unable to find their homes, and some people didn't even know the sheer number of cattle that had been lost until the spring. Surviving cattle were in poor health and worth little, meaning that the poor farmers and their businesses were, more or less, ruined over the course of the winter. So considering all of that, surviving that hell must have been a farmer's worst nightmare. And this is sort of referenced in the trailer itself.
We need to get those people warm and fed.
So overall, the period in time known as the Wild West was a pretty dangerous place to be, but it was a place full of opportunity. Very quickly changing place. You could be robbed or held at gunpoint at, well, more times than you'd probably willingly like to admit, but there was so much inactivity, so much new, arguable good, and of course, a really nice time to set your game in. But yes, that's more or less what I have for you on the Red Dead Redemption 2 universe, or at least the real-life equivalent of the Red Dead Redemption 2 universe. How about lore based off of the real-world events behind the Red Dead Redemption 2 universe? If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like, and of course, subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. But till the next video, have a very good day. I've been Prime, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.